On a crisp autumn evening, just as the sun was beginning to set, two teenagers were driving home from their high school basketball practice. The brother and sister pair were taking their usual route through the peaceful streets of their suburban neighborhood, chatting about their day and planning what to make for dinner since their parents would be working late. The brother, a tall high school senior who served as team captain, was carefully following all traffic rules as he drove their family's black SUV. His younger sister, a sophomore who had just made the varsity team, sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone to find the perfect playlist for their ride home. Mom texted to say she left money for pizza, she said, looking up from her phone. But I think we still have those leftovers from Dad's cooking last night. Her brother nodded, slowing down at a stop sign. Let's save the pizza money for another day. Dad's curry was amazing anyway. They were just a few blocks from home when they noticed the flash of red and blue lights in their rearview mirror. Not one, but two police cruisers were signaling them to pull over. What's going on? The sister asked, sitting up straighter in her seat. Were you speeding? No way, her brother replied, carefully pulling over to the curb. I was actually going under the limit. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as he remembered the conversations their parents had with them about what to do in situations like this. The siblings watched through the side mirrors as four officers emerged from their vehicles. Something felt different about this stop. The way the officers approached with such intensity, their hands hovering near their weapons, their stern expressions illuminated by the street lights that had just flickered on. Keep your hands where they can see them, the brother whispered to his sister, placing his own hands at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. Years of family discussions about these scenarios played through his mind like a well-rehearsed script. The tension in the air was palpable as one of the officers approached the driver's side window while another stood back, hands still near his weapon. The other two officers positioned themselves on the passenger side of the vehicle. Good evening, officer, the brother said calmly, despite his racing heart. May I ask why we've been pulled over? The officer's flashlight beam swept through the car's interior, momentarily blinding both siblings. License and registration, he demanded, his tone clipped and professional. Sir, I'm going to reach for my wallet in my back pocket, and my sister will get the registration from the glove compartment. Is that okay? The brother asked, remembering his parents' advice to always announce his movements. The officer nodded curtly, but his posture remained rigid. As the brother slowly reached for his wallet, his sister carefully opened the glove compartment, her hands trembling slightly as she searched for the vehicle documents. What the siblings didn't know was that their father, a respected state senator, was just finishing up an important committee meeting about education reform. Their mother, a prominent civil rights attorney, was in court presenting closing arguments in a significant case. Neither teenager wanted to worry their parents, but they both knew the situation felt different from a routine traffic stop. The sister glanced at her phone, which was still in her lap, and made a quick decision. While pretending to put it away in her pocket, she discreetly pressed her father's contact number, letting the call connect silently. Meanwhile, the brother was doing everything by the book. He handed over his license, which showed his clean driving record and his status as an honor student. His sister found the registration and insurance information, passing it carefully to him so he could hand it to the officer. Sir, the brother said steadily, this is our family car. We're just heading home from basketball practice at the high school. Our house is just 3 blocks from here. The officer studied the documents with his flashlight, looking between the papers and the teenagers multiple times. The siblings could hear the other officers speaking into their radios, but couldn't make out what they were saying. Step out of the vehicle, the first officer suddenly commanded. The brother's heart sank, but he kept his voice level. May I ask why, sir? We haven't done anything wrong. Step out of the vehicle, the officer repeated, more firmly this time. The sister's hand found her brother's arm, squeezing it gently. They both knew the stakes of this moment, how quickly things could escalate, how important it was to stay calm, how crucial their next actions would be. What the officers didn't realize was that the seemingly ordinary black SUV they had pulled over belonged to one of the state's most influential families. They were unaware that the leather wallet they were examining contained not just a driver's license, but also a special State House family identification card. They couldn't see the small government license plate number that marked this as an official state vehicle. Most importantly, they had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, their routine traffic stop was about to turn into one of the most significant moments of their careers, a moment that would lead to changes in police training across the state and spark a national conversation about law enforcement practices. The tension continued to build as the brother reached for his seatbelt, moving with deliberate slowness. The sister's phone was still connected to their father's number, silently transmitting everything that was happening. Neither teenager knew that their father had already left his meeting mid-session and was now racing toward their location, his years of public service and dedication to his community about to intersect with his most important role, being a father. The approaching footsteps of the backup officers crunched on the fallen autumn leaves, the red and blue lights still painting the peaceful suburban street in alternating colors. The crisp evening air carried the sound of more police radios crackling, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked at the unusual commotion in this typically quiet neighborhood. In those tense moments, as the brother prepared to step out of the vehicle, nobody present could have predicted how this evening would end, how it would become a catalyst for change, a teaching moment that would resonate far beyond their community, and a story that would touch hearts across the nation. The sister watched her brother's calm demeanor with admiration, even as her own heart pounded in her chest. They had been raised to handle situations like this with dignity and composure, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different from their family discussions around the dinner table. As the events continued to unfold, neither of them knew that help was already on the way, and that the next 5 minutes would change everything. The night air grew colder as the brother slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, his every movement calculated and deliberate. Through the windshield, he could see neighbors beginning to peek through their curtains, drawn by the flashing lights that had turned their quiet street into an impromptu light show. "Sir, please step out of the vehicle with your hands where we can see them," the officer repeated, his voice carrying an edge of authority that seemed to grow sharper with each word. The brother took a deep breath, catching his sister's worried glance. Without saying a word, he gave her a reassuring nod, the same kind he'd give her before a big basketball game, a silent message that everything would be okay. "I'm opening the door now, sir," he announced clearly, following the protocol their parents had taught them. As he stepped out, the cold autumn air hit his face, still wearing his basketball practice clothes, his high school team sweatshirt with his captain's number on the back. The officer stepped back, directing him to move toward the rear of the SUV. Above them, the street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement, and some way down the block, a car door slammed as another neighbor emerged to watch the scene unfold. "Hands on the vehicle," instructed one of the backup officers, moving forward to take the lead. The brother complied, placing his palms flat against the cold metal of their family car. He could feel the evening dew that had settled on the surface, soaking into the sleeves of his sweatshirt. Inside the car, his sister remained seated, her hand still gripping her phone. She watched through the side mirror as one officer began to pat down her brother, while another maintained his position with a hand near his weapon. Her heart raced as she heard them questioning him. "Where are you coming from?" the officer demanded. "Basketball practice, sir," her brother replied steadily. "I'm the team captain. We just finished our evening practice at the high school." "And where are you headed?" "Home, sir. We live 3 blocks from here, in the blue house on Cedar Street." The sister could see her brother's gym bag in the back seat, still damp from practice, his basketball shoes with the team colors visible through the mesh. Such a normal, everyday sight now seemed somehow important, evidence of their simple, truthful story. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," one officer explained, though his tone suggested he was reciting rather than explaining. A vehicle matching this description was seen leaving the scene. "Sir," the brother responded, his voice remarkably composed despite the situation, "this is our family car. We take this route every day after practice. You can call our parents to verify." "Keep your hands on the vehicle," the officer cut him off, continuing his search. The sister watched as another police car pulled up, bringing the total to 3 patrol cars, their lights creating a dizzying display that lit up the entire block. She could now count 6 officers on scene. A response that seemed excessive for 2 teenagers heading home from basketball practice. Through the open window, she could hear the rapid-fire radio chatter. "Code 3, subjects detained. Matching vehicle description." The technical police jargon made their routine drive home sound like something from a crime drama. Her brother remained still, exactly as their parents had instructed, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was still wearing his captain's armband. He'd forgotten to take it off after practice. There was something particularly striking about seeing him standing there, a high school basketball captain, an honor student, the kid who helped organize food drives for the local shelter, being treated like a suspect. The officers continued their questioning, their voices carrying through the quiet street. How long have you had this vehicle? Who owns it? Why are you in this neighborhood? Each question was answered truthfully, calmly, but the officer's suspicion didn't seem to wane. The sister noticed how they kept looking at the SUV's tinted windows, at its high-end features, as if trying to reconcile these details with their assumptions. Some of the neighbors had now gathered in small clusters on their front lawns, watching the scene unfold. The sister recognized several of them, people who had attended their father's community meetings, who had seen the siblings grow up on these very streets. One of the officers approached the passenger side window. "Miss, we're going to need you to step out as well." She took a deep breath, remembering everything her parents had taught her. "Yes, sir. I'm going to unbuckle my seatbelt now." Her voice was clear but quiet, masking the tremor she felt inside. As she stepped out into the cold evening air, still in her practice clothes with her team jacket wrapped around her, she could feel the weight of the moment. The phone in her pocket was still connected to their father's line, silently recording everything. The officers directed her to stand near her brother, their gym bags still visible through the SUV's windows, their basketball shoes and practice gear a stark contrast to the tense scene unfolding around them. Time seemed to slow down as the officers huddled near their patrol cars, discussing something in low voices. The siblings stood together, their breath visible in the cold air, waiting. They could hear fragments of radio communications, see the concerned faces of their neighbors, feel the weight of the moment growing heavier with each passing minute. What nobody on that street knew was that less than 2 blocks away, a black government vehicle was turning the corner, its driver well aware of the situation thanks to the open phone line. The siblings' father, still in his formal attire from the state senate session, was about to arrive at a scene that would change not just this evening, but the way their entire community thought about law enforcement interactions. The sister glanced at her brother, standing tall despite the circumstance, his captain's armband catching the light from the police cruisers. In that moment, they were more than just 2 teenagers heading home from practice. They were living through one of those pivotal moments their parents had prepared them for, handling it with a dignity that would later become part of a larger conversation about change and understanding in their community. The sound of another vehicle approaching caught everyone's attention. The officers turned toward the noise, unaware that the next few moments would completely transform this routine traffic stop into something that would be discussed in police training sessions and community meetings for years to come. The quiet evening air was suddenly filled with new tension as the sound of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. The sister's phone, still connected to their father's line, had done its job perfectly. What happened next would become a moment that would be remembered throughout their community for years to come. The sleek black government vehicle turned onto their street, its official plates catching the reflection of the police cruiser's flashing lights. The car moved with purpose, coming to a smooth stop just behind the last police cruiser. The officers turned their attention to this new arrival, hands instinctively moving toward their weapons. Inside the government vehicle, their father took a moment to compose himself. He had left a crucial Senate committee meeting the instant he heard the muffled sounds of officers through his daughter's phone call. Now, looking at his children standing in the cold, their basketball practice clothes offering little protection against the autumn chill, he felt a mix of emotions that every parent would understand. As he stepped out of his car, his presence commanded immediate attention. He wore a tailored suit, his Senate pin gleaming on his lapel, but it was his calm demeanor that truly stood out. He moved with the confidence of someone who had navigated difficult situations throughout his career, though none quite as personal as this. "Good evening, officers," he called out, his voice carrying the same measured tone he used during Senate sessions. "I believe you've stopped my children." The officers exchanged quick glances, their postures shifting as they noticed his government plates and official credentials. The lead officer stepped forward, his hand moving away from his weapon. "Sir, this is an active investigation. "I'll need you to step back," the officer stated, though his voice carried less authority than before. The father reached slowly into his jacket pocket, producing his state Senate ID and his driver's license. "I'm state senator from the 14th District," he said calmly. "Those are my children you've detained, and that's my state-issued vehicle they're driving." The atmosphere on the street changed instantly. Neighbors who had been watching from their lawns began to murmur among themselves. Several had their phones out, recording the interaction. The father knew this moment wasn't just about his family anymore, it was about every family who had ever faced similar situations. "Sir, we had reports of a similar vehicle involved in suspicious activity," one of the officers began to explain, but the father gently raised his hand. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "But I'd like to know why it takes 6 officers and 3 patrol cars to investigate 2 teenagers coming home from basketball practice in their own neighborhood." The siblings watched their father with a mixture of relief and pride. This was the man they knew, someone who could stand up for what was right while maintaining his dignity and respect for others. They had seen him work tirelessly for their community, but never had his role as a father and a public servant merged so powerfully as in this moment. The lead officer's radio crackled to life, and a voice came through confirming the vehicle's registration to a state senator's office. The officer's demeanor shifted noticeably, their earlier suspicion replaced by a growing realization of the situation. The father walked over to his children, placing a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. "Are you both okay?" he asked softly, his eyes checking them for any signs of distress. "We're fine, Dad," the brother answered, still maintaining his composed demeanor. "We were just following everything you and Mom taught us." The sister leaned slightly into her father's touch, the tension of the last few minutes finally starting to ease. Her phone was still recording in her pocket, capturing every word of this encounter that would later serve as a powerful teaching moment. The father turned back to the officers, his presence both authoritative and conciliatory. "I think we all understand that there's been a misunderstanding here," he said. "But I'd like to know what suspicious activity warranted this level of response to 2 teenagers in basketball gear." The commanding officer stepped forward, his earlier aggressive stance now replaced with a more professional demeanor. He began explaining about a reported incident involving a similar vehicle, but even as he spoke, it was clear that the details didn't match up with the senator's family SUV. More neighbors had gathered now, many of them recognizing the senator from community meetings and local events. They watched as this father, who had championed education reforms and community policing initiatives in their state, now faced a situation that perfectly illustrated why those reforms were needed. The father listened patiently to the officer's explanation, years of legislative experience evident in his measured response. "I appreciate your dedication to protecting our community," he said finally. "But I think this incident highlights some important issues we need to address in our police training and community relations." The sister noticed how some of the younger officers were shifting uncomfortably, perhaps seeing the situation through new eyes. Her father had always taught them that real change comes not from confrontation, but from helping others understand different perspectives. The night air had grown colder, but nobody seemed to notice. The father's presence had transformed what could have been another tragic headline into something different, a moment of potential understanding and change. As the officers began to realize the full scope of the situation, their professional training kicked in differently. The commanding officer started to apologize, but the father raised his hand again. "Instead of apologies," he said, "I'd like to suggest we use this as an opportunity. I'm hosting a community forum next week at the State House about police community relations. I'd be honored if you and your fellow officers would attend. Let's turn this moment into something that benefits everyone in our community." The siblings shared a knowing look. This was their father, always finding ways to build bridges, to create understanding, even from difficult situations. The tension that had filled the street just minutes ago was transforming into something else, an opportunity for positive change. The neighbors who had gathered began to disperse, many of them nodding in approval at how the situation was being handled. They had witnessed something remarkable, not just the de-escalation of a tense situation, but the beginning of what could be a meaningful dialogue in their community. The night that had started with basketball practice and a routine drive home had become something much more significant. As the police lights finally turned off and the officers began to leave the scene, everyone present knew they had just been part of a moment that would spark important conversations throughout their community and beyond. The father watched as the police lights faded into the darkness, leaving the street in its usual peaceful state. But the evening was far from over. He turned to his children, seeing beyond their calm exteriors to the tension they were still holding in their shoulders. "Let's go home," he said softly, guiding them back to their SUV. The few remaining neighbors waved supportively as the father checked both his children's vehicles to ensure they were safe to drive. His actions, so natural, so paternal, spoke volumes about the reality many parents faced every day. Inside their home, the warmth enveloped them like a protective shield. The sister's phone, which had captured everything, lay on the kitchen counter as their father prepared hot chocolate, a family tradition for processing difficult moments. "I'm proud of you both," he said, stirring the steaming mugs. "You handled that exactly as we practiced, exactly as we hoped you would." His voice carried both pride and a hint of sadness, the complicated emotions of a parent who had to prepare his children for such encounters. The brother, still in his basketball captain's sweatshirt, sat at the kitchen island. "I kept thinking about all our family discussions," he said quietly. "But it felt different when it was actually happening." Their father nodded, sliding the mugs across the counter. "That's why we practice. That's why we talk about it." He paused, looking at his children, star athletes, honor students, community volunteers, and saw them as both the accomplished young people they were and the small kids he still needed to protect. The sister's phone buzzed, their mother calling. She had just finished her court session and heard about what happened. The father put the phone on speaker, and their mother's concerned voice filled the kitchen. "Is everyone okay?" she asked, her legal training evident in how quickly she began gathering details. As a civil rights attorney, she knew the importance of documenting everything while it was fresh. The siblings took turns explaining what happened, their voice steady now in the safety of their home. Their mother listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Years of handling similar cases had taught her what details mattered most. "You did everything right," she assured them. "Everything we taught you, everything we prepared for. I'll be home in 20 minutes. While they waited for their mother, the father sat with his children, not as a state senator, but simply as a dad. He shared stories from his own youth, experiences that had shaped his dedication to public service and community reform. "What happens next?" the brother asked, thinking about basketball practice tomorrow, about facing his teammates and coaches. Their father considered the question carefully. "That depends partly on us," he said. "We have a choice. We can let this be just another incident, or we can use it to create real change." The sister, who had inherited her parents' passion for community service, spoke up. "Those officers at the end, they seemed different when they understood who you were. But what about families who don't have a state senator for a father?" Her question hung in the air, carrying the weight of the larger issue they all understood too well. Their father nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his daughter's words. "That's exactly why we need to do something," he said, "not just for our family, but for every family who's ever been in this situation." The sound of their mother's car pulling into the driveway brought them all to attention. Moments later, she rushed in, still in her court attire, immediately gathering her family in a tight embrace. As they sat together in their kitchen, the family began to plan. The father's upcoming community forum could be expanded. The mother's legal expertise could help shape new training protocols. The siblings' perspective as young people could add a crucial voice to the conversation. "We should invite those officers," the brother suggested, surprising everyone. "Not to criticize them, but to help them understand. Maybe if they hear our story, here are the stories like ours." His sister picked up the thought. "We could invite my basketball team and the other youth groups. Make it a real conversation between police and young people." Their parents exchanged proud glances. This was the silver lining they had always taught their children to look for, the opportunity to turn difficult moments into catalysts for positive change. The mother, who had been taking notes, looked up from her legal pad. "We should document everything while it's fresh," she said, "not for any legal action, but to use as a teaching tool." The next hour was spent carefully recording every detail: the initial stop, the officer's approach, the way the situation evolved. Each family member added their perspective, creating a comprehensive picture of the evening's events. As they worked, their home felt like a command center for positive change. The father made calls to fellow senators and community leaders. The mother drafted outlines for new training protocols. The siblings began planning how to involve their school and sports teams in the upcoming forum. "This is how change happens," their father said, looking at his family with pride. "Not through anger or confrontation, but through understanding and education." The kitchen clock showed it was well past midnight, but none of them felt tired. The adrenaline of the evening had been transformed into purposeful energy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, explaining to coaches, facing curious classmates, dealing with community attention. But tonight, they were just a family, turning a frightening moment into an opportunity for growth. The sister's phone still lay on the counter, the recording of the entire incident saved securely. What had started as a simple drive home from basketball practice had become something much more, a catalyst for change, a teaching moment, and a reminder of why their parents had always emphasized the importance of maintaining dignity and purpose even in difficult situations. As they finally prepared to head to bed, the brother paused. "You know," he said, "I think tonight showed us exactly why all those family discussions were so important. We were ready." His father squeezed his shoulder. "Yes, you were. And now we'll help make sure other families are ready too." The kitchen lights dimmed, but the spark of purpose that had been ignited that evening continued to glow. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to turn this incident into something meaningful, not just for their family, but for their entire community. The next morning arrived with a different energy in the household. The family gathered around their breakfast table, the events of the previous night still fresh in their minds, but now transformed into purposeful determination. The sister walked into the kitchen wearing her basketball warm-up jacket, scrolling through messages from teammates who had heard about the incident. Word had spread quickly through their tight-knit community. "Coach wants to talk to us before practice," she told her brother, who was already in his school clothes. Their father looked up from his laptop where he'd been drafting plans for the expanded community forum. "How are you both feeling about going to school today?" he asked, his voice carrying the gentle concern that had made him such a respected figure in their community. "Ready," the brother replied, straightening his collar. "People need to see that we're not letting this define us." His sister nodded in agreement, and their parents shared a proud look across the table. Their mother, already dressed for court, was making calls to her contacts in the police department. She had spent the early morning hours reviewing the recording from her daughter's phone, taking detailed notes about the interaction. Now she was working to channel that documentation into constructive change. "The police chief wants to meet with us today," she announced, covering her phone's microphone. "He's taking this very seriously." The father nodded, adding another note to his growing list. "We need to make sure this meeting focuses on solutions, not just apologies," he said. "I've already heard from several other families who've had similar experiences. This is our chance to create real change." As the siblings prepared to leave for school, their parents gathered them for a moment. The mother adjusted her daughter's basketball jacket, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle. "Remember," she said, "you're not just students today. You're advocates for change." The brother grabbed his car keys, then paused. "Should we take different routes to school?" he asked, the previous night's events clearly still on his mind. "No," their father said firmly. "Drive the same route you always do. Hold your heads high. You did nothing wrong." The drive to school felt different that morning. Other students and parents had gathered in small groups in the parking lot, conversations quieting as the siblings arrived. Their fellow basketball teammates immediately surrounded them, offering support and asking questions about what had happened. The brother's coach approached, his face showing concern and determination. "We're going to address this as a team," he said, "not just as a basketball issue, but as something that affects our whole community." Throughout the morning, teachers and students approached the siblings, many sharing their own stories of similar encounters. What had started as a frightening incident was rapidly becoming a catalyst for important conversations throughout the school. During lunch, the sister sat with her teammates, explaining how their family's preparedness had helped them handle the situation. "It's not just about knowing your rights," she told them. "It's about staying calm and turning difficult moments into opportunities for change." Meanwhile, their parents were meeting with the police chief in his office. The father, still in his Senate attire, sat beside their mother as she played the recording from their daughter's phone. The chief listened intently, his expression growing more concerned with each passing minute. "This isn't just about one traffic stop," the father explained. "It's about creating a new standard for police-community interactions." The mother opened her briefcase, pulling out a detailed proposal she'd drafted in the early morning hours. "We've outlined several recommendations," she said, her legal experience evident in the thoroughness of her approach. "Training updates, community engagement programs, youth outreach initiatives." The chief leaned forward, studying the documents. "This could be a model for departments across the state," he said, recognizing the potential for positive change. Back at school, the brothers' basketball team had gathered for an impromptu meeting during free period. The coach had created a safe space for players to share their experiences and feelings about police interactions. "What happens to our captain and his sister could have happened to any of us," one teammate said. "We need to be part of the solution." The sisters' varsity team was having similar discussions. Their coach had announced that the team would participate in the upcoming community forum, wearing their team uniforms to show unity and support. As afternoon practice approached, both siblings received a text from their father. The police chief had agreed to implement new training protocols and participate in the community forum. More importantly, he wanted the officers from the previous night to share their perspectives on how the encounter had changed their understanding. The mother spent her afternoon in court, but during breaks, she worked on expanding the forum's scope. She reached out to other civil rights attorneys, community leaders, and youth organizations. The response was overwhelming. Everyone wanted to be part of this transformative moment. The father's Senate office became a hub of activity. Colleagues from both sides of the aisle expressed support for new legislation addressing police-community relations. What had started as a frightening traffic stop was evolving into a movement for meaningful change. During basketball practice, both siblings played with renewed purpose. Their teammates watched in admiration as they channeled their experience into leadership, encouraging unity and understanding both on and off the court. "Sometimes the most important plays happen off the court," the brother told his team during a water break. "Sometimes leadership means standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." As evening approached, the family reunited at home, each bringing updates about how their day had unfolded. The kitchen table became a meeting space once again, covered with notes, proposals, and plans for the upcoming forum. The sister shared how her teammates had volunteered to help organize youth participation in the forum. The brother described how his team wanted to create a student-led committee to improve police-youth relations. Their parents listened proudly, watching as their children transformed a potentially traumatic experience into an opportunity for community growth. This was the lesson they had always hoped to teach. That change comes not from dwelling on injustice, but from working actively to create solutions. As they finished dinner, the father's phone buzzed with another message. More community leaders had pledged their support for the forum. The mother smiled, adding another page to her growing proposal. "This is how real change happens," she said, looking at her family. "One conversation, one action, one moment of understanding at a time." The siblings exchanged glances, recognizing that their drive home from basketball practice had become something much bigger than themselves. It had become a catalyst for the kind of change their parents had always worked toward, and now they were part of making that change happen. As the days leading up to the community forum passed, the family's home became a center of constant activity. The living room transformed into an impromptu planning headquarters, with sticky notes covering the walls and laptops scattered across every surface. The brother sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through emails from students across the district who wanted to participate. "We're going to need a bigger venue," he called out to his father, who was on the phone with city officials. The convention center offered their main hall, his father replied, covering the phone's microphone. "They want to be part of this too." The sister walked in from basketball practice, still in her team uniform, carrying a stack of handmade posters her teammates had created. "Coach says the whole athletic department wants to attend," she announced, carefully laying out the posters. Each one carried messages of unity and understanding between youth and law enforcement. Their mother arrived home from court, her briefcase bulging with new proposals and letters of support from other civil rights attorneys. "The police academy wants to incorporate our story into their training program," she said, settling onto the couch and kicking off her heels. The family had been surprised by how quickly their experience had resonated throughout the community. What started as a frightening traffic stop had sparked a movement that crossed all social and political boundaries. The doorbell rang, and the brother opened it to find the officers from that night standing on their porch. They had come, not in uniform, but in civilian clothes, looking notably different from the authoritative figures they'd been just days ago. "We'd like to help," the lead officer said, his voice carrying a humility that hadn't been present during the traffic stop. "If you'll let us." The father invited them in, and soon they were all seated in the living room. The officers listened as the family shared their perspective on that night, and then offered their own insights into the challenges and pressures they faced on the job. "We need to do better," one of the younger officers admitted. "That night opened our eyes to how our actions affect families, affect communities." The sister brought out her basketball team photos, showing the officers the community service projects they'd done. The brother shared stories about their youth leadership programs. Slowly, the officers began to see them not as suspicious figures in a vehicle, but as the community leaders they truly were. "This is what we need," the father said, gesturing to their circle of conversation. "Real dialogue, real understanding. This is what the forum should feel like." The officers agreed to participate in the forum, not just as law enforcement representatives, but as community members willing to learn and grow. They even offered to help coordinate with other police departments interested in implementing new training protocols. As evening approached, the mother ordered pizza for everyone, and the conversation continued. The officers shared stories about why they joined the force, dreams of protecting and serving their community. The siblings talked about their hopes for the future, their fears, and their determination to create positive change. "You know," one officer said, watching the brother help his sister hang another poster, "this could have been such a different story. Instead, you've turned it into something powerful." The next few days brought more surprises. Local businesses offered to sponsor the forum. Community organizations pledged volunteers. The high school principal announced that students who attended would receive community service credits. During basketball practice, both siblings noticed a change in how their teammates interacted with the school resource officer. Instead of avoiding him, students began engaging in conversations, asking questions, sharing concerns. The brothers' team even invited officers to join their practice one afternoon. The sight of police officers in basketball shorts, running drills with teenagers, created exactly the kind of bonds the family had hoped to foster. "This is what community policing should look like," the father said, watching from the bleachers as officers and students shared high fives after a good play. The mother focused on the practical aspects, working with police leadership to draft new protocols for traffic stops involving young drivers. Her legal experience helped bridge the gap between community needs and law enforcement requirements. The sisters' phone recording became a powerful teaching tool. With the family's permission, it was used in police training sessions to demonstrate how quickly situations could escalate and how they could be handled differently. Local media picked up the story, not as another incident of tension between police and community, but as an example of how challenges could be transformed into opportunities for growth. The evening before the forum, the family gathered in their kitchen, just as they had on that fateful night. The brother made hot chocolate, their tradition now carrying new meaning. "Remember," their father said, "tomorrow isn't about pointing fingers. It's about building bridges." The mother nodded, reviewing her notes one last time. "It's about turning that moment of fear into a movement for change." The siblings shared a look, remembering how differently things could have turned out. "It's about making sure other families have the tools to handle these situations," the brother said. "And making sure these situations happen less often," his sister added. As they prepared for bed, the sound of cars parking outside drew them to the windows. Community members had arrived early, setting up chairs and hanging banners for tomorrow's forum. The convention center glowed in the distance, ready to host an event that would ripple through their community and beyond. The officers who had stopped them that night were among the volunteers, working alongside students and parents to prepare the venue. The sight of such unity, born from what could have been a tragic encounter, filled the family with hope. "Look at that," the father said softly, watching the diverse group of people working together. "This is what community looks like." The mother wrapped her arms around her children, proud of how they'd handled everything. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start writing a new chapter in our community's story." The siblings headed to bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring challenges and opportunities. But they were ready. Their family's experience had shown them that even the most difficult moments could become catalysts for positive change. As night fell, the last of the volunteers headed home, leaving the streets quiet once again. But this time the quiet felt different, full of promise and possibility rather than tension and fear. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of something new, something important, something that started with one traffic stop and grew into a movement for understanding and change.